Now, as we say these things, or as I say these things about resurrection, and as I say with all this excitement that we enter into, can I suggest that we as a church sometimes they'll fall into a trap of viewing the resurrection as an end in itself. God has risen. And we kind of leave it there sometimes. Yes, there's victory over death. Yes, there's grace offered. And we say yes, and then we go on living. And certainly this is true, but can I suggest that that's only part of the good news of the resurrected life? God's victory over death is also an invitation to all people to join in grace today, to live and to practice the resurrected life now with our lives, with all of who we are. So to join in grace is to become embodied witnesses of the resurrection. So let's read from there. So this is where our story picks up. Then they, that's Peter and John, they go home, and Mary was standing outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone else standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was a gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to him and cried out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. And this is something we ought to note, that Jesus, before crucifixion and after the resurrection, seems to reveal himself first to people on the edges of society. It was the Samaritan woman at the well to whom Jesus first revealed that he was the Messiah in the Gospel of John. And it was now Mary Magdalene to whom resurrected Jesus is revealed after the resurrection. And so he says, "But go, find my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Do you see what Jesus is doing in this phrase as he commissions her and releases her? This woman, this marginalized person who's healed and following Jesus, and now he's giving her this important message to share to the disciples. Like, remember, John and Peter were just there, and he doesn't trust them with that message yet. It is Mary who he releases. It is Mary he says, "I want you to share this message." And do you see the words here? My Father is your Father. My God is your God. He's revealing the resurrected reality in these words. Any distance we believed existed between us and God, any distance that Mary believed that existed between her and God, have been bridged by Jesus. Between her story and God's story. Her story is now God's story. Go tell my brothers. Go tell others the resurrected life. Your story, all the brokenness, all the things it held, is now within God's story. My God is your God. My Father is your Father. So we are to look for signs of God's presence. We are invited in Jesus' message to look for his presence and grace in the ordinary parts of our life, but maybe more specifically to pay attention to the margins of our society. And so to rejoice, to live in the hope of the resurrection, means to be present in our everyday life, everyday moments we find ourselves in. The resurrected life means receiving and offering grace, embodying the reality that our stories and God's stories are one story bridged to Jesus. And then to pay attention to people like Mary, who maybe be embodying Christ's presence ahead of me, who may have heard and seen the Lord. My Father is your Father. My God is your God. And look, this was the message and teaching that Jesus had orchestrated to help us see and understand even before his resurrection. That is what the kingdom of God on earth would be like. All will be noticed. That God will always hear the cries of the oppressed. And we are to respond with the hope of our story being joined in God's story. and to tell people the good news that my Father is your Father. My God is your God. Jesus instituted all of this even before he went to the cross. Before the resurrection, he washed the feet of this motley crew that he calls his disciples, knowing very well that some of them would abandon him, deny him, forget him, run away. He washed their feet. And read, after washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. Since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done. Jesus invites us into this embodied reality of love. The resurrected life means that we live as a preview of what it will look like when the kingdom of God comes from heaven to earth. We step into this reality now with all of who we are. And so after washing the disciples' feet, Jesus had this beautiful communion meal. And a communion in our tradition is understood as a means of grace. It's a sacrament, which simply means through this meal we open ourselves to the divine love that is already there. We become more ready to receive the love and respond to it. And in this meal, we become embodied witnesses of Jesus' life, death, but his resurrection and anticipation of his return. We with joy and hope receive grace and respond to God's love by loving others. We pay attention to his presence. We join in grace and we share the good news wherever we find ourselves in. Friends, we embody through his body.